Brother Bert, can you hear me? All right. I have 9 o'clock. I checked with Brother Bert. If he can hear me, that means the thing is on. In addition to those that are mentioned sick in the bulletin, there's a couple we're going to add to that. Andrea is home again, not doing well. Brother Brian Weldon has been having a couple of bad days with his balance and everything, so he's not here. So let's just keep all those in our thoughts and prayers that are on the sick list. Brother David, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this day you bless us with, another Lord's Day to share on the earth. We're thankful, Father, that we have this opportunity to gather here as family. We are mindful of those who mentioned being sick, that we know of our family and friends who are ill. We ask, Father, you extend your hand of mercy down upon them and heal them as be your will. Be with those who have been struggling, Father, to give them the strength and the knowledge to make them better. Father, as we enter into study this morning, let's have open minds and hearts and look to your word as the truth that it is, no matter what science says, Father. We know that your word is the true science. Be with Larry and me, in Jesus' name, amen.
I will let you know right now that I've got about 6 hours of material that I have cut down from 12 hours. So we're just gonna see what we can get done this morning. We're going to be looking at the geologic timetable, and I know that's almost impossible for most of you to see. I did break it down in halves so you could sort of get a better look. But the Bible and science agree on a lot of things. But the basic thing is time and how things came into existence and when things went out of existence. If you'll notice there, somewhere around 500 million years ago, which is right on the bottom of the list, there's a little thing called a trilobite. Now, scientists say that little trilobite is 500 million years old, went extinct 500 million years ago. Now, this is an imprint, a fossil that was found in Utah back in 1976. And some say that it looks like a shoe print, like a sandal or a moccasin, and then right on the heel of it, there's a trilobite, which would mean it would be impossible for that trilobite to have went extinct 500 million years ago if there is a footprint that has squashed one. Others say that it's just a natural break in the slab formation. This is slate. This is what happens, and you'll see that it's in layers. And what happens is there'll be a layer of sediment that will be compressed, and well, if you go to the beach, for instance, when there's no water on the beach, the sand up there, you can step in it and leave an imprint, and then when the wave comes in, it generally washes away that. But if you can imagine just more sand blowing in on top of it, and then compressing and compressing. So I'm going to let you make up your own mind whether you think that was 500 million years ago and just broke in that particular formation, or whether you think that it was a trilobite that was stepped on with somebody in sandals that had to have been within the last 6,000 years or so. So you make up your own mind about that. Now, basically, when we look at the geologic timetable, there are two thoughts. One is an old Earth, being 4.5 billion years old, and one is a young Earth, being 6,000 to 8,000 years old, depending on how you go about looking at it. So we're going to start with the young Earth and look in Genesis. Now, we learn from Genesis, let me rephrase that. We learn from the Bible, if you take the genealogies and list them out, and then we know periods of the judges, periods of the kings, and then when we start getting around David, around 1000 BC, we start bringing in archaeological evidence to back all of this up. So if we are looking at a young Earth, we're looking at the Earth being somewhere God created it somewhere around 4,100 BC. I listed by the genealogies, and Brother David Howard talked about this a little bit in his class Wednesday night when he was talking about the flood. I'm going to also bring up the flood, but look at it from a little bit different area than he looked at it. But this is the people, and as you see, if you take the timelines, the genealogy that was in chapter 5 of Genesis, and add them up from the age of Adam to the age of Noah when he went in on the boat or the ship, it adds up to 1,656 years. So we're going to round it off to say about 1,650 years from creation to flood. Now, the reason I wanted to bring that up is the major events that happened during the antediluvian period between creation and the flood are creation, the fall of man, how man grew progressively more evil until the time of the flood when God said, going to start over. So, pointing this out for a few reasons. Between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 6:6, basically, that covers about 1,650 years. So we know very little about that time period, except that if you look at this, man lived anywhere from 500 to 900 and something years. The life expectancy was long. And then we know by the time we reached the bondage period, Joseph only lived to be 110. Moses lived to be 120. So the age of lifespan of man pre-flood was totally different than lifespan of man after flood. And if we get down to Psalms 90 and verse 10, it says, "The days of our years are 70. And if by reason of strength they be 80 years, yet is their strength labor and sorrow, for it is cut off, and we fly away." So we can see where the ages come down. And also, because we know so little, we've got to take just what few verses we can to try to figure out what was going on. If you look at Genesis 1:29 and 30, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat." And it was so. So based on this one verse here, it appears as though everything antediluvian, pre-flood, was herbivore, no meat eaters. If we then look at Genesis 2, verses 5 and 6, it says, "Every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground, but there went up a mist from the earth, and watered the whole face of the earth." So, from this verse, it appears that the earth was watered a different way. It was sort of a closed system and watered a different way than it was after the flood. And we can see that the environment was different, food was different, life expectancy different. And then when we get to Genesis 9, verses 1 through 3, it says, "And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things." So apparently pre-flood, everything was herbivore. After flood, then you have herbivore, omnivore, and carnivore. So And as I said, the life expectancy went from 5, 6, 7, 8, 900 years to down into the low 100s. So if you think about the flood for just a moment, think about how violent the flood was. And the reason I'm bringing this up is there are many people who are in the evolutionary side of science that say everything moves slow. It took things a long time to happen. But if you look at the other side of it, how rapidly does things happen when there are catastrophic events? And I would call the flood a catastrophic event, because if you look at chapter 7, verses 11 and 12, it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were open, and the rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So just in 40 days and 40 nights, enough water came from below and above to cover the earth. Genesis 7:17 through 20 says, and the flood was 40 days upon the earth, the waters increased, bare the ark up, and it was lifted up above the earth, and the waters prevailed and were increased greatly upon the earth. And the ark went upon the face of the earth, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. 15 cubits, if we use a standard cubit, would be about 22 and a half feet. If we use a royal cubit, as David went into Wednesday night, it would be a little bit higher. But a lot of people think there is no way that that much water could exist. If you take the earth right now and you shave off at sea level, well, let's go 15, 20 feet below sea level. You shave off everything that is above water, 15 feet below water, turn it upside down and put it in the deepest parts of the ocean, you're going to have water, water, and water to spare. There are places in the ocean that are miles deep. So there is plenty of water to go around. Now, according to the National Earthquake Information Center, we have 55 earthquakes a day. Now, we don't feel them all, but around the world, we average 55 earthquakes a day. Some of them are, like I said, we don't feel, and others are very, very severe. If we go back into just a little bit of history in America, what is the strongest earthquake that has ever hit America? Reelfoot Lake. The earthquake that created Reelfoot Lake, which is the New Madrid earthquake. See, in 1811, 16th of December, 1811, an earthquake hit the New Madrid area, Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee juncture there, that was rated somewhere between 7.2 and 8.2 on the Richter scale. Same day, they had an aftershock of 7.4. January of the next year, they had another aftershock of similar strength. In February, they had another. So they had 4 of those major earthquakes. It's still registered as the strongest earthquake in our recorded history. A lot of people want to go to San Francisco along the San Andreas Fault and all like that. But what makes the one in New Madrid so interesting, at least to me, is if we go to California, the San Andreas Fault, that is what they call a formational zone, meaning that's where tectonic plates meet and grind against each other. New Madrid was it was in the, not dead center, but it was in the middle of the plate. It was a weak spot. It was so strong that the Mississippi River ran backwards for a few hours. And as David mentioned, it created a lake in Tennessee, Reelfoot Lake, that prior to that had been a forest. If you ever get out there, you can't put a real boat in because the stumps would knock the motor off. You have to use what they call a lake boat. Got an inboard, outboard type setup on it. But great strength. I'm going to do this before I, that is just one more earthquake I'll mention and then we'll move on. The earthquake that hit Japan, or just off the coast of Japan in 2011, was one of the strong. It was over 8 point, getting up close to 9. It actually moved Honshu Island, which is the main island of Japan. It moved it 8 feet to the east. And it lowered 240 feet of coastline by 2 feet. I call that a catastrophic event. Before we go into volcanoes, I want you to see this section. I've got some film up here. This one is going to be just a little over 3 minutes.
You know, I grew up in a country like this. My dad and I would ride our horses up to these amazing high mountain lakes. We'd ride back into some pretty remote wilderness areas with incredible streams and meadows and wildlife. I love it here. Look at this canyon. It reminds me of the Grand Canyon. You got this little stream, you got these steep canyon walls. How long do you suppose it would take for a stream this small to remove this much material and cut the canyon this deep? This rock has a history, just like I do, and just like you do. It came from somewhere. A lot of these rocks have been dated to be 350,000 years old, up to 2 million. That's pretty old. But it might surprise you to know that all of the geological formations that we see here, the canyons, the layers, even the plants, are younger than I am. When I was born, there was nothing here but a vast forest, hundreds of feet below where we're standing right now. In fact, before 1980, most people had never even heard of Mount St. Helens. It was in that year, on May the 18th, that molten rock created a steam blast with a force of 20 million tons of TNT. Avalanche debris and other flows from the eruption laid down all of those layers rapidly, up to 600 feet thick. A couple years later, there was some more volcanic activity that created a mud flow that cut out this entire canyon. It also cut through deep bedrock, all in a couple days. Isn't it amazing what a little bit of information from the past can do to help change your view of the present and the present world around you? There are a lot of assumptions made by a lot of people about the history of the earth around us. The question is, how do those assumptions affect how we view that history? But more importantly, how do they play in how we view science and the Bible? Did God create the world in a few days or billions of years? Is mankind descended from apes, or did God create us instantly in his image? Was there a global flood that destroyed the earth, or is that a myth? In other words, is Genesis history?
Very quiet in here. Y'all must have enjoyed that little snippet. And then there are some scientists, as we've said, that thinks things happen much, much more slowly. So for there to be an old Earth, that means there has to be old rocks. So how does science evaluate the age of rocks? Let's start there. They have what's known as a rock cycle. As you can see on the chart there, they go, sandstone, sediment rock will weather, go back to sediment, be compressed, pressurized again, turn back in, or it could go into the magma and change all different things. But in essence, when they go into dating, there's two dates that they use. One is relative dating, meaning that they just line things up the way they think things happen from old to young. And then there's absolute dating. And the absolute dating, they use methods from radioisotopes and things of that nature, the decay rates and all, to try to calculate their age. This video, this next section, is about 5 minutes long, and it is most interesting when it gets into that kind of thing.
The geologist at a place where he said we could understand this better.
You see the quietness, expanse, nothing to disturb you. Yet you've got the reminder that it was explosive in the past. There was this volcano back here, the Silicon volcano, and it belched out this lava flow that spilled out across this countryside.
Just a huge amount of basalt lava.
Yeah, but it's actually small compared to the lava flows that we see in many places. And there's something like 1,000 of these volcanoes around here. The little one behind us here, we call that a cinder cone volcano.
You call that a little one?
Yeah, well it is. I mean, these volcanoes are small. Mount St. Helens, 1980, when it erupted, okay? The top 2,500 feet of the volcano blew off, but that was small compared to historical eruptions. We can go back a little bit further to the Great Yellowstone eruption, and some of the volcanic ash was down in Texas. It blew that far away. You think about lava flows in India, that you have an accumulation of up to 1,000 feet over an area a third of the size of the subcontinent of India. What we see in the present is really only minuscule by comparison with what we've seen in the past. And that's telling us something about the historic past. We can't use present day rates of these processes to understand how quickly and how majestically, in terms of scale, the geological record accumulated.
Well, that is the point that has brought me to you, because how do we determine the age of these rocks?
Well, the important first thing is to recognise that this lava flow is, in a sense, an instant in time. It's an event. And when it's molten, you've got all the different elements that have come out of the volcano all mixed up, and the rock starts to crystallise. Any of those atoms that are radioactive, they now start to accumulate what we call the daughter products, the decay products. Now, the point is that this rate of decay is so slow when we measure it in the present that it takes millions of years for parent atoms to decay into daughter atoms. And so that's ultimately where the millions of years come from, the fact that the decay rates in the present are slow.
But we would say that present is not really the key to the past, because obviously the past holds some massive, massive catastrophic events that are not going on
In
today.
fact, the Bible would say that the past is the key to the present. If you want to understand why the way the world is today, you've got to understand what happened in the past. So we've got lots of hints that geological processes haven't been at constant rates through time. And we have other hints that the decay rates may not have been constant. See, we've taken rock samples from a number of places. Lots of samples in the Grand Canyon of each of these rock layers. I've done it in New Zealand. We've done it in other parts of the world. And what we've done is we've submitted the same samples to more than one of these dating methods. And so what we found is on the same samples with more than one method, we were getting ages that were different by hundreds of millions of years and even a billion years in some instances. We're seeing huge differences by using different methods.
Well, if there is that kind of a difference between all of these dating methods, then that would seem to confirm the fact that we have an
these clocks are not reliable. We've got evidence that rates were faster in the past. Suddenly, we may not be thinking in terms of millions of years. We may be thinking in terms of a history that is much shorter.
But you were saying that this kind of evidence is in the open literature now.
Yes.
And why is it not making an impact?
Well, I've been asked that when I've spoken in university geology departments, and the answer is it's because there is a commitment to the millions of years. And so once people get locked into that focus, anything outside that field of view that conflicts with that focus is marginalised. And the reason why the millions of years is important, if we go back in the history of scientific thought, Charles Lyell in England proposed millions of years, and they multiplied the ages for the rocks. And that was the foundation on which Charles Darwin built. In fact, he read Charles Lyell's book and was convinced of the millions of years of geological evolution, so he could say, now, given enough time, what we don't see happening in the present, we might only see small changes in the present. Given millions of years, small changes can add up to big changes. And so, if you want to have a way of looking at the history that says that we got here by chance, random processes over millions of years, then you've got to have rocks that are millions of years old. Otherwise, you undermine that whole foundation of that view of Earth history.
So time becomes the critical element for the conventional paradigm, and that time has to be deep time.
Wanted y'all to see that because he is a very smart professor talking about that and how things work on a much more compressed time. If you just look at the earth that we live on today is still very, very volatile. We live in a pretty safe zone, but we see what happens with tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, how rapidly the landscape changes with floods. But in all these other areas where we're talking about volcanoes and earthquakes, how much more rapidly things will change. I'll mention a couple of volcanoes as we go through. We showed Mount St. Helens here. In 1883, Krakatoa, some of you may have heard of that one. It was actually 3 volcanoes, and when this one blew, it obliterated the other 2, and half the mountain on the first one was gone, and so the others, all you could see was water. And then Anak Krakatoa, what they call the son of Krakatoa, started rising up out of the ocean in the early 1900s. By 1927, you had another volcano there. And then in 2018, it erupted and collapsed, and now again it's ocean. So we're always in a constant turmoil. If we go back to 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius, many of you have heard of that. I'm going to get David to speak of that because he has been there. He saw Pompeii and also Herculaneum. Just as a side note, before I let him do that, there is to me anyway, is a very interesting tie between Mount Vesuvius and the Bible. If we go into the book of Acts and we look at the history there that's happening with Felix and Drusilla. Drusilla was the 3rd daughter of Herod Agrippa I, had left her husband, was in an adulterous relationship with Felix. Both she and her son died in Mount Vesuvius volcano. But that's not talking about landscape. Brother David, you got a minute or two to talk about the landscape changes and all that you witnessed or saw there?
Sure. So you've got Vesuvius kind of off the coast, the west side of Italy, and I don't know, it's probably 3 or 4 miles in. South of it is Pompeii. In between the west coast and Vesuvius is a city called Herculaneum. Herculaneum saw the eruption, all the dust and everything going south and covering Pompeii, and for 2 or 3 days they're watching this, enough that archaeologists were certain that there was a certain city there because of records, but they didn't really know if it was made up or not, just kind of a fable. And a whole city was formed above it. And eventually they started excavating, and they excavated a hole in the ground probably the size of, I don't know, a quarter mile in diameter, straight down, and, you know, found all this, the houses that they found. But there is still a full-size Colosseum buried underneath there that only archaeological scientists can go back to through caves or caverns that they cut. But just that, and there's some other sister cities that were affected too.
And if my memory serves me correct, Pompeii was buried under 82 feet of ash. It rained ash for about 6 hours straight on Pompeii. So things can happen very, very quickly on this earth. We don't have to go for a long time. Now, yes, ma'am.
My brother was in Washington State, and he came to Michigan after St. Helens erupted, and he had to stop 3 times and have his car serviced because of the ash got up in the motor and stuff. But he brought some ash back to us, and it is real fine, real lightweight.
It's almost a powder.
Happen to make it weak, would have to be a lot of ash.
Yep.
I mean, because it's finer than sifted flour. It's
Yep.
real tiny.
I was stationed at Clark Airplane Patch back in the early 70s, and in 1990, Mount Pinatubo completely decimated that area. 12.5 miles away from the base closed, evacuated, and they've never put a base back there. So, but the testing methods here, the radiometric dating methods that they use uranium and lead as one of them, and it says the method relies on 2 separate decay chains, one of them being a half-life of 4.47 billion years old. Now, you just saw the video where the guy says that we're not in a closed system. It's open. Decay rates were different. For us to really understand how old something is, you either have to have a constant aging process or know the beginning date. You can't figure it any other way. So if the decay rate was not consistent and you don't know the absolute beginning date, how are you going to figure the age in between? And the second one there has a half-life of 710 million years, a lot shorter, but still very inconsistent. And then they have another system called the potassium argon, another one. And even the scientists tell you, like the guy did there, that it is important to note that radiometric dating assumes certain conditions, such as a closed system, no addition or removal of parent or daughter isotopes, and constant decay rate over time. Now, I want to shift gears and do something just a little bit different, because in all of this, as we try to add up some time, this is near Lompoc, California, and they found this whale, a baleen whale, and it was buried in what they called diatoms. A diatom is a small microscopic algae, and as they die and form, it takes them a long time to build up into layers. Now this thing here, it shows that this whale is on its back, rib bone still sticking up. How does it stay in that position long enough for multi-thousands or million years to take place and all those diatoms build up. Now, what they have discovered on this is that it was actually flat on its back still, and because the diatom layers were the same, that's the reason they know that as they settled, this was its original position. And then something happened, earthquake, whatever, that shifted it into that more or less tail-standing upright position. But it is impossible for that whale to have, the bones to have been there hundreds of thousands of years for all those diatoms. What happens when an animal is killed or dies out in the woods and is left exposed, bones and all? Within a couple of years, there's nothing left. Even the bones are gone. So for there to be a fossil of any kind, that has to take place rapidly. Sedimentation has to cover it. It has to be a rapid covering for fossils to take place. And what is one of the major events that would have caused all this dying and quick burying? The flood. Now, there's a lot of folks that say that the flood is when the earth land masses started breaking up into continents, because of that one verse I read that the deep broke up. From all I can study, both Bible and outside Bible, it sure appears that at one point in time there was one land mass. And that would account for why you have the same types fossil bones on all the continents. And then it broke up. There's also a verse after the flood that may help us, and there's a couple of ways to look at that verse. Brother David, you got your Bible open to, go to Genesis 10 and verse 25, please. 10 and 25.
Two sons were born to Eber. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his day the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan.
Peleg, son of Eber, was born about 100 years after the flood. So sometime between 100 to 200 years after the flood, it's saying that this happened. Now, there's two ways to look at that verse. One of them is that is when the Tower of Babel that's mentioned in the early part of that chapter, that's when God divided or separated man on the earth. And then another view of that is because of the word earth being used, and the word divide, the way it is, would mean that that's when the planet, the continents started moving away from each other. I've got my opinion. I'll let you form your own on that. But to me, first time I went through natural science, I didn't have a clue about tectonic plates. They called it the continental drift, if some of you have been in school that long ago. Second, third, and fourth time I went through science courses, then they talked about tectonic plates. To me, when they describe something real scientifically, like the tectonic plates and the movement of the earth, all they're doing is explaining how God did everything that God did. When God put this world together, he put it together in a certain way, and all of that then builds from there.
So Larry, I didn't get into it last week, or Wednesday. One of the thoughts about where all this water came from and everything, I mean, obviously you touched on it a second ago, but the earth and its molten state and all that superheated the water. Is, you know, there was basically eruptions at that time that God used to superheat this water. Geysers, you know, things that it went into the sky, and it filled up the land so quick that it couldn't leave quick enough. So all that water moved from here up so much water at any given time that it can't get away from there. So all this water that is underneath the layer of earth, was superheated, went out and, came down so quick and it took a while to go away, so it just was displaced. So, and that kind of helps with that as well because the breaking up.
And also, I didn't have real enough time to go really deep diving into it, but since you brought that particular subject up, they have even recently within the past decade or so, discovered that there are actual freshwater aquifers under the oceans. So there's more water than what we think of. It's not just the ocean. After the ocean, there's the sediment, bedrock, and all, and then there are aquifers of fresh water under that.
Sometimes people think that God created more water and then he took it away, but all the water that we have was all that was needed. It just needed to be in a different spot than it currently is.
Which goes back to one of your lessons about the first law of thermodynamics. Can't destroy it, can't create it. It just changes states. This image up here is what they call a polystrate fossil, or this is a tree. I wanted to show you this because if you look at it, there's strata, 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 strata. How does one tree stand up long enough to accumulate over that many years all those stratas? So basically what a polystrate fossil or tree is, just means it goes through more than one layer. It goes through a couple of stratas of material. The whole point that I'm trying to point out here is that I firmly believe factual science, but science has to be able to be tested and replicated. When we get into some of the theories of science, I can't adhere to that. I have in my lifetime witnessed rapid changes in the earth. Study of history, rapid changes. So I encourage all of you to watch the whole video that I showed snippets of. It's called Is Genesis History? It is on YouTube. You can watch it for free. It's about an hour and 44 minutes, 45 minutes. It goes through this and some other, and I'll extract some of this material for next week when we talk about dinosaurs. But there's making comments in there that most of the scientists want there to be a little water over a long period of time changing things. Whereas if we read the Bible and look at other things, a lot of water can change things in a very short period of time. I've done a lot of fast pedaling on my bike today to get through this part. Is there any questions or comments or?
I know we didn't mention it, Larry, but I've seen it somewhere, I don't remember the amount. But when they calculated that amount of water above the highest mountain at this time, which they may not have been saying, the weight of water on the point down at the bottom, how heavy that would be. When you talk about, well, it takes all this heat and pressure, what do you think 20,000 feet of water is going to do?
Yeah. And since you mentioned that, and this is just me personally, I don't believe that this earth was the shape it's in now pre-flood. I don't believe the mountains were as high as they were. If it was on what they call Pangea, or they even got another term now for a supercontinent, but if all of that was there and it was all below water, then as things started changing with all the volcanoes, with all the earthquakes, upheavals pushing the tectonic plates now, one goes down, one goes up. So there's all kind of changes that happen very rapidly. So I firmly believe the book of Genesis is history. We'll leave the question out of that. Thank you all so much for your time and your attention.